Welcome back to the program. We're continuing our discussion about the humanitarian and political crisis in Syria with journalist Afshin Rattansi from London, Bassam Abdullah, director of the Center for Strategic Studies at Damascus University in Syria, and Paul Salem from the Middle East Institute right here in Washington, D.C. And Paul, let me start this segment with you. There is some talk, some analysts are saying that what we're seeing happening in northwestern Iraq, in Syria, is actually just a proxy fight between the two great religious forces in the Middle East, that is, the Sunni branch of Islam and the Shia branch of Islam. Do you believe that?
Well, only partially, and obviously that's very much present there. But I think the problems in Syria and Iraq, like the problems previously in Lebanon, are problems of politics. Politics that have been very dysfunctional in many parts of the Arab world. We saw, revolts in many parts of the Arab world, including Syria. The political systems simply have not been inclusive enough, have not been certainly democratic, and that has led to great discontent in Syria. There's the great discontent in Egypt, in Iraq, in many countries. Sadly, in our part of the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, there is a sectarian fault line. There are Sunnis, there are Shias, there are Lebanese, there are Syrians and Iraqis, but that fault line does exist. And unfortunately, the two big petro-states of the region, Iran and Saudi Arabia, both have very strong sort of religious and sectarian identities. And indeed, they have, when problems have arose between these communities, which are basically domestic problems that should have been and could have been dealt with domestically, unfortunately, they fueled these fires. It happened in Lebanon a few years ago. It's happening in Syria and in Iraq. Certainly, the region is being torn apart partly by these forces, including also the U.S. and Russia and others getting involved in very irresponsible ways. But I do think, when all is said and done, Syrians themselves will have to sit down together, hammer out a new political agreement. There were attempts, Geneva I and Geneva II. They failed, but it might take a longer time. In Lebanon, we had a civil war that lasted a full 16 years before we finally, as Lebanese, came together, and there was much external intervention, Soviet intervention, Israeli intervention. So these things are very ugly and very difficult, particularly for the people of those countries. But at the end of the day, it's up to the Iraqis, up to the Syrians, like it was up to Lebanese, to begin to figure out how they're going to live together in a political system which has sharing of power, where everybody has a decent amount of stability, security, and but the groups like ISIS and others have no place in such a resolution because they don't want to be part of this kind of thing. That's why it could be a common threat that maybe many parties at least can agree on that, even though sadly there's very little progress being made politically in Syria and Iraq. Next door, we hope that with the new Prime Minister, Mr. Maliki left, with Mr. Ibadi, that we hope that he will be able to put together a new government with strong Shiite
which
Kurdish
could possibly be more inclusive and bring in Sunnis.
Help Iraqis pacify their own country.
Right.
Really.
I want to go to Afshin in London. Afshin, what do you make of the fact that the United States and its allies in Europe are arming Peshmerga forces? These are Kurdish forces to take on IS. There's the United States now arming a non-state actor in a country with which it has diplomatic relations, which it recognizes as a sovereign state. I mean, what kind of a precedent does that set?
It is an incredibly interesting one, Alan, isn't it? I would just say, though, about what Paul was talking about, sectarianism, pretty poor tool at understanding any of this. And as to him being from Beirut, I got to say, everyone in Beirut, whatever sect, Christian, Jewish, or Sunni or Shia, applauded Hezbollah's response to what Israel did. As for us, Britain too, apparently, helping in the fight with the
intervention in Syria, though. They applauded their defense of Lebanon, but not their intervention in Syria. Just to correct.
Well, everyone was on Iran's side in a sense because Iran was supporting Hezbollah. But it has to be said that Britain and America helping the Peshmergas, how close will they get to realizing that it was the PKK, the prescribed terrorist group in Washington and in the European Union that's really doing the big fighting against ISIS, not the other Kurdish parties in that corner of the region, which are themselves fighting different sides all the time, some of them being allied to Israel. So the idea, I mean, as we know, Britain and America, an appalling record in funding non-state terror groups in different parts of the world. So maybe the Peshmerga probably aren't the right ones, and it should be the PKK. But I don't think Istanbul would be too happy with that. There is a solution. That's the point. If Obama and Cameron want to avoid what now look like seeing like impending terrorist attacks on London here and on Washington and New York, again by quasi-ISIS forces traveling around the globe at the moment, there is a solution. And if Obama was serious about that solution, he'd do it.
What's the
I
solution?
don't know whether you want to ask me what that solution
Yes,
is.
what's the solution?
Well, it's so obvious. There should be an international conference with, between President Obama and President Assad of Syria and President Rouhani of Iran, and other players from Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Qatar should be invited, and there should be a full-scale peace conference. But of course, Obama is not interested in talking to President Assad or President Rouhani, and this is why if we see in the next year and ISIS continues to get funding from Saudi Arabia and forces in Qatar, we all fear for ourselves here in London, and you should fear for yourself in Washington, because there will be attacks.
Dr. Abdullah, do you think that that is the solution, a grand conference involving all the major players to resolve this, a peace conference?
I think the internal affairs of every state, nobody can enforce the solution. First of all, we think in Damascus that the solution, political solution, if we can talk about that, it's internal affairs of Syrian people. They can solve their problem.
But the Syrian government isn't in control of large swathes of Syria.
No. Geneva 1, Geneva 2, it's not opposition. Real opposition, it's, they are inside Syria. They are agents of other states. We are not in front of a Iraqi picture or Lebanese picture. And they are not a good democracy for Syria. If you will take about democracy, it's not a recipe or tablets I can take from President Obama every 6 hours and it will be very good democratic. You know, every society, it has its conditions, it has its history. Nobody can enforce democracy. Democracy, you should forget about that. We should prepare ourselves. It's not a
I meant to stop the
and I don't think that. I don't think
stop
that
the advance of ISIS,
came to Syria to enforce democracy. Please, please, you should understand the history of Syria, the culture of the people. We are not ready to accept
I've been there quite a few times. I'm just saying, to stop ISIS, there needs to be a conference with these regional players.
To stop ISIS, I think I mentioned that. Yes, I mentioned that before about ISIS. ISIS is a product of the regional U.S., West, and Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey. Everyone he knows that, and I think U.S. Closed its eyes about ISIS. What we should do, we should first of all to cooperate in to stop the ideological propaganda which we can find on a lot of websites and satellite channels. Secondly, to stop financing and observe that. Third, to close the borders with Turkey. I think everyone he can observe that the Turkish border is open and the Turkish government is cooperating and controlling the ISIS forces. Besides that, we should, what we will do with thousands of people came from other states. We have more than 87 nationalities. What the Tajik or Chechen or Uzbek or Turkish, I don't know. So the danger of ISIS that this ISIS can, now it's internationally, it's multinational people. There are European and American. If one, and they have European passports, American passport, what you will do? I mean, this my speech to the Western societies and to Western public opinion.
Okay, Dr.
Now we have in front a huge problem. We should cooperate together. Without that, nobody can. The ISIS will kill the Western people and the Eastern and the Syrian and the Iraqi, because ISIS is looking to all others, to all others as an enemy.
Okay, Dr. Abdullah, time's catching up with us. Paul, briefly, if you could tell us, are we going to see an alliance here between Western countries, the United States, its European allies, and the government of Bashar al-Assad to take on ISIS? I mean, that was something that was mooted by a former UK Foreign Secretary, Malcolm Rifkind. He said, sometimes you have to develop relationships with people who are nasty in order to deal with people who are even nastier. Those were his words.
Well, I think from the U.S. Perspective and what President Obama has said just recently, there wouldn't be the possibility in Washington politically for any alliance or close work with the government based in Damascus. In the government in Baghdad, there was a much longer relationship, and even there, the Americans said, well, Prime Minister Maliki has to leave, and we need a new prime minister with an inclusive government. We can work with that government. So no, I don't think there will be any alliance. There might be indirect coordination at the intelligence level or certain operations, possibly. I would not be surprised. But I don't think we will see what we are seeing in Iraq, which is effectively an alliance with the central government in Baghdad and an alliance working with the government in Erbil, which is, to be accurate, I mean, the Peshmerga are not a non-government actor. They are part of the, Iraqi security establishment. Their salaries are paid by Baghdad, actually. They're part of that federal structure, whether we think it's a good idea or not. That same situation, that type of relationship above board is not possible at this point with the Syrian government. Now, if politically things change, anything is possible.
Paul Salem, Afshin Rattansi, Dr. Bassam Abdullah, thanks to all of you for joining us.